Hello, my name is Susan Slowinski, and today I will be discussing my graduate research project on the conservation history of the American bison. Now, you may have heard American bison referred to as buffalo, but this common name is actually a bit of a misnomer, as buffalo traditionally refers to several Old World bovid species. However, the term buffalo has been used to refer to the American bison so often throughout history that it has since become commonplace. The scientific name for the American bison is bison bison, with the species divided into two subspecies. You're probably most familiar with the plains bison, bison bison bison, as it is associated with the western plains and grasslands of America. The plains bison has a dense, woolly bonnet of hair between its horns, with a thick beard and a full throat mane. The other subspecies of bison is the wood bison, Bison bison athabascae, which occupies the boreal forests of northern North America. Wood bison are generally larger and heavier than plains bison, with longer horns. So, going into a little bit of the life history of the American bison, they are one of the largest wild bovid species alive today. Their diet is herbivorous in nature, consisting of various grasses and sedges. Bison will typically travel in migratory herds, which travel to better grazing pastures with the changing of the seasons. Females usually spend all of their life living in maternal herds with other females and their offspring. Traveling in large herds provides a degree of protection for the smaller calves from predators, such as wolves or bears. When males are old enough, they leave these herds to either wander alone or join smaller bachelor herds. At the start of the breeding season, which lasts from July to September, males will rejoin herds to mate with females. Typically, the most dominant male, usually the oldest and the biggest, will keep a harem of females. Younger males sometimes get the chance to reproduce with unmated females later in the season. Dominance is generally determined by birth date, with the calves born earlier in the season having a head start on their growth and development compared to those born later. Gestation lasts approximately 285 days, with females giving birth to a single calf. Most calves are weaned before they reach 1 year old and will reach sexual maturity around 3 years old. American bison were once extremely abundant in North America, with a contiguous range extending from northern Mexico to well into Canada, and from Idaho to western Pennsylvania. The map to the right shows the original range in tan, the range in 1870 in light brown, and the range in 1889 in dark brown. The once contiguous range split into two by 1870 and was further reduced to a few small spotty populations by 1889. Although no concrete numbers were recorded, the most accepted estimate puts their pre-1800 population numbers between 30 and 60 million. Some estimates would even argue 100 million was possible. During the 1800s, American bison experienced a rapid rate of decline as Americans expanded westward. Tens of millions turned to millions by 1870, and millions turned to hundreds of thousands by 1880. Only 9 years later, in 1889, a census conducted by William Temple Hornaday estimated only approximately 1,000 bison were alive, which included both bison in the wild and those kept on ranches. Only a few hundred free-range bison still inhabited the West. Within only about 100 years, the American bison population dropped from tens of millions to barely 1,000, and human activity is solely to blame. Settling the West was an attractive option for many Americans in the 1800s, with more opportunities to establish farmland and the prospect of wealth with the gold rush. Westward expansion was largely facilitated by railroads, which could transport large amounts of people and goods back and forth between the country. Bison provided an important source of food for railroad construction workers, but the real carnage started once the railroads were completed. Train collisions with bison caused serious damage, and large herds could delay trains for hours or even days. There are accounts of hunters shooting countless numbers of bison from moving trains, almost as if it were some sick carnival game. The dense pelts and hides of bison were also sold to be made into clothing and leather, creating a market for bison skins. As a big game species, sport hunting was also popular. As ranchers made their way west, they converted the plains and grasslands to grazing fields for domestic cattle. Bison were also killed so that they couldn't compete with livestock for vegetation. With no protective legislation and their existence seen as an obstacle to be eliminated, the unchecked aggressive slaughter of bison caused populations to plummet. The only respite for bison that occurred during the 1800s was a result of the Civil War, with most Americans and their firepower concentrated on the war effort. Unfortunately, overharvesting quickly resumed after the war was over. The bison decline had a significant impact on Native American people. For thousands of years, Native peoples coexisted with bison, hunting them as an important source of food. Rather than taking on an entire herd, as bison can easily trample or gore a person to death, Native Americans would isolate a single individual and corner them, making it easier to take down. Bison not only supplied an abundance of food, but their hides were used for warmth and their bones made into tools. Archaeological evidence shows bison were incorporated into cultural and spiritual rituals. With the arrival of horses in the 1700s, brought over by Europeans, Native Americans could more effectively chase and hunt bison. Guns made it even easier to take down these mighty beasts. With the demand for bison meat and pelts from settlers, Native Americans became more economically dependent on trading with them. This created conflict between tribes over hunting grounds, which was only worsened as bison became more scarce. Not only did Native Americans lose a source of food, but their way of life was destabilized as well. The need for bison conservation was brought to public attention by William Temple Hornaday, a notable American zoologist and the first director of the New York Zoological Park, which is better known today as the Bronx Zoo. Hornaday was an advocate for conservation of wildlife, but is best known for his dedication and contributions towards the recovery of American bison. As I mentioned earlier, Hornaday censused the remaining population of bison, documenting the lowest abundance in history. In an effort to conserve some of the surviving population, he kept a small herd of bison at the zoo, which started their captive breeding program. To this day, a herd of American bison still lives at the zoo, which I got the chance to see during a field trip for Dr. Whidden's mammalogy class. After breeding success with this herd, 15 individuals were transported from the Bronx Zoo to a game preserve in Oklahoma, marking the first animal reintroduction program in North America. The American Bison Society was also started in 1905, with Hornaday as president and Theodore Roosevelt as the honorary president. Through petitioning and fundraising, the society established and supported several federally managed and protected bison herds. The society's efforts are undoubtedly the primary savior of the species. With population numbers on the rise, the original American Bison Society disbanded in 1935. As with any species that experiences a near-extinction event, bison underwent a genetic bottlenecking. As a quick review, genetic bottlenecking is a result of when a population experiences a sharp reduction in size, leaving relatively few individuals to make up the gene pool. Although a species may manage to recover in numbers, the event often results in a loss of alleles that were present pre-bottlenecking. While herds of bison once commonly intermingled across their previously large range, overhunting fragmented the population into small, disjunct herds. This increased the likelihood of inbreeding and loss of heterozygosity, which is associated with a decrease in fitness, as harmful alleles are more likely to arise with high degrees of homozygosity. This also reduces the species' ability to adapt and thrive in response to environmental changes. Thankfully, the purposeful transport of different individuals between herds during early conservation efforts has likely reduced the negative consequences of genetic bottlenecking. With the introduction of cattle to the West as ranches were established, both accidental and purposeful crossbreeding of bison and cattle occurred, with the two species genetically similar enough to hybridize. This hybrid is oftentimes called a beefalo. The image to the right shows an example of such a hybrid, demonstrating the shaggier coat of a bison and the white face of a Hereford cattle. The resulting female offspring were fertile, but the first generation of male offspring were infertile. Additionally, hybrid vigor that is usually associated with crossbreeding was not evident, as the hybrid was not really any larger or stronger than either of the parent species. This hybrid pairing did not gain the same level of popularity as something like the mule, but the evidence of the practice persists within the mitochondrial DNA and nuclear DNA of modern bison herds, which still contains a small percentage of microsatellites associated with domestic cattle. While this reduces the genetic integrity of the species, ranchers played a necessary part in bison conservation, as they had the resources and space to raise and protect the few remaining bison. Disease is a common conservation obstacle, and although there are quite a few that impact bison, I will only be discussing two major examples. The first is brucellosis, caused by the bacteria Brucella abortus, which infects elk, cattle, and bison. Based on the name, you can probably already guess the primary symptom. Infected pregnant females will abort the fetus before it comes to term. The infection is spread through oral contact with the contaminated tissues and bodily fluids, so if members of the herd come to investigate the aborted fetus and come into contact with it, more bison become infected. This disease is especially prevalent in the Yellowstone National Park bison herd, with approximately 60% of adult females testing positive for the bacteria. There is no real effective treatment or vaccine, which is why brucellosis has been such an issue. Another serious disease that impacts bison populations is bovine tuberculosis, caused by the bacteria Microbacterium bovis. While bovid species are the primary hosts, other animals, such as pigs and deer, act as secondary hosts. This chronic infection can cause debilitating lesions on the internal organs, shown on this cow lung here. The bacteria are spread through inhalation and ingestion. The disease was believed to have first spread from cattle to plains bison, and then from plains bison to wood bison. While antibiotic treatment is possible, the disease is best managed with quarantine and depopulation of infected individuals. Now, let's look at more modern statistics regarding bison range and abundance. The International Union for the Conservation of Nature has classified the plains bison as near threatened and the wood bison as vulnerable, with the Endangered Species Act listing the wood bison as a threatened species. Public herds, which are managed by the government with conservation in mind, collectively contain 31,000 individuals. Some notable herds thrive in Yellowstone National Park, the Tallgrass Prairie Preserve, and in Antelope Island. A herd of 1,000 is generally accepted as a stable population, but relatively few of that size exist. The map here shows the 2003 distribution of herds, with wood bison represented by light brown diamonds and plains bison as dark brown circles. While the distribution is nowhere near its former glory, it is a marked improvement from 1889. The majority of bison are actually held in private herds, with estimates hovering around 400,000 individuals. These herds operate with commercial use in mind, raising bison as livestock. The IUCN includes the Species Survival Commission, which established the Bison Specialist Group, with the following mission statement. The purpose of the Bison Specialist Group, BSG, North American section, is to contribute scientific evidence-based support for development and implementation of comprehensive and viable strategies and management actions to improve conservation and achieve ecological restoration of the American bison, including plains bison and wood bison, where feasible throughout the original range of each subspecies. In their 2010 Species Survey and Conservation Guidelines, the group emphasized the ecological restoration of bison, guided by a set of 12 principles. I won't list them all here as they are a bit verbose, but rather I'll summarize their main points. Firstly, cooperation between government, nonprofit, and private organizations is necessary for creating management plans. Secondly, adequately large areas of land must be protected and restored to the standards necessary to support stable populations of bison. Finally, the ecological and economical value of bison must be balanced, encouraging people to recognize the importance of sustainable populations and responsible harvesting. If you've ever gone to a restaurant, you might have seen bison burgers on the menu. Bison are considered a livestock species, and there is a modern market for meats, bones, hides, and breeding stock. The recommended commercial herd should consist of a single bull with 10 to 15 cows, although larger operations do exist. To prevent inbreeding in such small herds, new individuals are bought at auctions or traded between ranchers. Their meat is an attractive option to many consumers due to the low fat and low cholesterol content compared to traditional cattle beef. Native American communities have become active advocates for the conservation of bison, with the Intertribal Buffalo Council being a prime example. Since their establishment in 1991, the group has grown to encompass 69 tribes across 19 states. They are currently trying to get the Indian Buffalo Management Act passed, which would provide federal funding for tribe-centric conservation efforts. Additionally, they are responsible for the distribution of herd development grants, which provides money for tribes to establish new bison herds. Bison have also persisted in our modern culture and symbolism. In 2016, the American bison was declared the national mammal of the United States. It is also the state mammal for Kansas, Oklahoma, and Wyoming. The bison was also incorporated into the design of the nickel between 1913 and 1938, with the design recently brought back on the commemorative half dollar, which you've probably seen TV commercials for. Additionally, the bison is a mascot for multiple institutions, ranging from sports teams to universities. The conservation history of the American bison should rightfully be considered a success story, but it is a story that is not yet over. With the fragmentation of suitable habitat in still relatively small populations, careful management of the species will likely be necessary for many years to come. Although the decline of American bison was caused by the negligent actions of mankind, the careful actions of others saved them from extinction. The bison carries with it a great historical, ecological, and commercial significance, making it a species people want to conserve.